Hi, I'm Bob Knote, and on this episode of the Camp Chaos Chronicles, I'm going to show you how to finish rebuilding the hub carrier on a Jaguar independent rear suspension system. Nobody looks forward to doing this, but it ain't awful. Dang it. On a previous episode, I showed you how to rebuild the fulcrum end of the hub carrier. And that wasn't bad, just a lot of little bits and pieces to it. This end up here is just a couple of bearings and a spacer to make sure that you got the free play right on the stub axle. First thing we're going to do is look at the parts that we have to have in order to make this happen. Now, when we pulled the hub carriers apart, this stuff was filthy dirty, grease everywhere, and just like everything else in this restoration thing that we do, about 85% of the time of any job you do is spent just cleaning this stuff up. That's the part of the job I hate, but it's my plan to hire somebody to do that this year. Okay, so what we got is two scrupulously clean hub carriers with no cracks in the webs. We've got the hubs themselves. We've got two bearings for each hub. We've got two seals, outer and inner, and we've got a nut and a washer, and then two spacers. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take all four of these bearings and do the packing deal. Another one of my favorite jobs. So now we get to start assembling stuff. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to install the bearing races in the hub carrier itself. We've got one on the outside, the big one, and then we've got another one on the inside. I'm not going to show you how to do both because it's all pretty much the same thing. What I want to do here is just kind of show you how I do it without actually using a hydraulic press. It's a matter of tapping it in evenly all the way around. Now, you can only go so far, otherwise you're going to start banging on this this portion of the hub carrier right here, which is where this seal fits in. And we don't want to damage that surface. So what I'm going to do at this point is take a punch, a regular round punch, go from side to side, checking every now and again to make sure, oops, ding that up a little bit. So that's one of the issues when you're doing this on camera. Just keep doing this all the way around until it's flush with the bottom of this machine surface. Okay, now you see we still have 1/4 of an inch to go here. Now we could actually just sort of grab the edge of the punch like that and just keep going, but what I've done is I have a special punch that I've made that enables me to get more of the punch onto the race and keep on going. Take your time, we're not in a hurry here. And you can tell when it's seated. It goes from kind of a dull sound to a very sharp. Okay, so this is the surface then that this bearing is going to fit in. Now we can't actually at this point install the seal, although I've got a little bit of a ding that I need to clean out there. Because on this one right here, the bearing is actually smaller than the seal. On the other side, we can't do that. The seal is the last thing to go in because the seal is much smaller than the bearing is. So now we can put the seal in. I've got that little ding fixed right there. Now you got to be a little bit careful with these seals because while they're coated with plastic here, there's a sheet metal shell on the inside here. And the wider this is, the more susceptible that's going to be to damage. This one we could probably, I'm taking a body hammer here, and just lightly tap it in all the way around. But I would rather use some kind of driver. Now what, I just happened to find this piece of aluminum pipe laying around. This would work great. You could also take a piece of flat steel and do this. You only want to go in flush with the surface here. And you could even use a piece of hardwood and it'd work. So you just tap it in. The reason you're doing this is to spread the load out so there's a lesser possibility of damaging the shell. And there we are. And again, you can kind of tell the difference in the sound as to whether it's seated or not. Our next task will be to install the outer bearing. Now, this step is really important. You want to put it in so the cone is facing upward, not downward. If you do this, you're going to have to take this out and do it over. Okay, so it's not an awful press fit, but it's going to take, again, either a hydraulic press or like this piece of pipe here, we're going to set this on top of so that we don't damage the ends of the studs. And then we have this piece of pipe, which is the same size as the inner race. And then we're going to go to town on this thing. Actually, it got turned a minute amount sideways. And so I'm going to use the same technique that we used on the races to get this all the way down. And again, we can feel when we got it. And there we are. And now what we have is this little impulse wheel that works with the ABS. It kind of concerns me that it's got all these little serrations around here, and that might provide it with a little more opportunity for it to break. So what I've done is I've heated this up for about a half hour at 400 degrees, which will expand it and make it a little bit easier for us to drive it onto the hub. Bang, there it is. So these two hubs are ready to go in. It's time to install the hub in the hub carrier. So what I'm going to do is take a little grease Get it mostly on the bearing itself, but get some on the seal there. And then, now is a really good time to, because you're going to have to fill the cavity with grease anyway, just go ahead. Okay, this is uglier than it really needs to be, but you get the idea. Slather a bunch of grease on there because you're going to have to do it anyway. When you get this thing together, the manual says, fill it up with grease till it won't take any more. And while this isn't all it will take, it'll get you a long way to that, because otherwise you're going to be pumping it in with a grease gun. Okay, lovely. So now we can take this. We haven't got a whole lot of grease in the outside, and just sort of, there you go. Okay, work it into the seal, down against the bearing, and we can feel that we got a really nice bearing surface in there. Okay, so at this point, we then are in a position to install the inner bearing. Again, make sure you install this the right way. This taper goes in, and we'll set it on there. And start setting it in. There we go. I shot a couple of clips trying to explain what the adjustment process is using the actual parts once they've been assembled, and I wasn't having a whole lot of success making any sense out of that. So what I've got here is a very simplified diagram of what's going on here. Now, the green part of this is a cross section of the actual aluminum casting of the hub carrier. All right, these purple parts here are the two bearings, the inner bearing and the outer bearing. This is the bearing itself. This is the race. Bearing, race, bearing, race. This black area right here is actually the hub. The outer bearing gets pressed on here, and the inner bearing, this one, gets pressed on here. As I've got it set up here, you can see that there's a certain amount of clearance in between these two bearings and their races. And there's a very specific number for that. It has to be between 1 and 0.003 of an inch, 0.001 and 0.003. Okay, so what we do, and these two big brown washers here are representing, if we were to take a long piece of threaded rod and run it through here and put a nut at both ends and then just started tightening. So what's going to happen? If you were to do that, ultimately what would happen is that this piece of threaded rod we're running through here would actually take and squeeze everything down so there would be no clearance in between the bearings. Bad thing. So what we can do here is we can take a spacer, one of these right here, and we can locate it on this shaft, which would put it right here, a little square cross section that would fit right on the end of the hub itself. So what's going to happen now? Well, as we tighten this up, in our example here, the threaded rod, As we tighten that threaded rod up, ultimately what's going to happen is these washers are going to mash down against the spacer, and it can't go any further. This whole thing is going to be locked together, but there's still going to be a certain amount of clearance in between these bearings. And that's how we can adjust the play between these bearings, is taking, if it's too much, if it's more than 0.003, we can find a spacer that's thinner than that, put it in there and close it up. And maybe a couple of trials. Actually, it should only take one. If you've got a clearance of, let's say, 0.008, okay, you need to get to, let's say, 0.002, which is in the middle of that range. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to find a spacer that's 0.008 of an inch thinner than the one you've got in there now. And that should give you exactly what you need. You should be able to do this in only one trial. Now, I hope that makes sense, because I'm done with this. I got to move on. As you recall, when I installed the inner bearing, I put it in all the way until it's seated. Now, from my diagram, you understand that there has to be some clearance there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hammer and tap it on that flange a couple of times. Until I've got some clearance. If I was to just leave that and try to do the setup that I just described, you might be able to get some clearance, but it would be false. It would be erroneous. What would happen actually is that once you've installed it on the car and you get everything torqued, what used to be maybe 0.002 of an inch now suddenly opens up as that inner bearing slides out because of all the weight of the vehicle. This thing is just kind of wobbling all over the place. So what we have to do at this point then is to pick a shim or a spacer like this to do our first trial. Now, the first one that came out of here was 0.25 of an inch thick. Now, I put new bearings in here, and I want to be sure that when I tighten this up, I've got too much, so I've got a 1/35 thousandths spacer here, and I'm going to slide that on here. By the way, you need to make sure that this sealing surface is on here, because they can fall off. That kind of messes everything up if that's not there. And we're going to take this and line it up with the splines. And these are really, there we go, really precise splines, so it takes some work in order to get it to slide through there. And by the way, we're only using the end yoke, or the hub itself, not the whole drive shaft. This is mainly for demonstration purposes, but also I use one of these just to set these things up. I've got a special one set aside, and I'll once I get everything set up, I'll install this in the car and then install the axle shaft. So then we put the washer on here, and bang it tight. Now what you really want to do is torque this to the proper torque setting, but I'm just going to be demonstrating this. So what I need to do now is to install a dial indicator. Now, and the way I'm going to do that, I had to make a special little bracket. By the way, we've got some holes that are drilled here on the sides of the flanges on the bottom there, and also on the top here, in order to install clips to retain the ABS sensors cabling. So I'm going to use this one up on top. What I do is I drill them out and then tap them to 832 from just the sheet metal to make sure that that never comes loose. Those cables, we'll demonstrate them later. So we install this like this. It's much more sturdy than the sheet metal. Screws, and then install our dial indicator. Wow, that closed it right up. Even that 135,000 spacer. Okay, that is there. We're looking at, okay, if I push it in all the way, when that's at 0, we've got 5/1000ths of an inch clearance. Okay, it's still big. So what I got to do is I've got to find a spacer that is 3/1000ths of an inch thinner than what I've got. And they go in 3/1000ths increments. As it turns out, I don't have the right size shim, but having given it some thought, I rummaged through my drawer of homemade tools and I found this. What this is a tool that I made that, I mean, it was years ago when I was doing my track car. Needed to come up with exactly the right size spacer, and I came up with this tool. Basically, it's been turned on one end to the inside diameter of a spacer, and then with a center punch, it's been peened at at 90-degree intervals, and I cut a little slot in here so that I could measure the shim without taking it off the mandrel here. And then what you do is you lock it up in a drill press and spin it up against some wet or dry sandpaper. This is 80 grit, I believe, after you've put some oil on it, and you should be able to get it down pretty quick to what you need. And it's just that easy. Well, we've got 2 hub carriers together, and it only took us about 2 years to do it. Well, life isn't only about cars. There's other things going on. Now, we're not going to put the hub carriers on the vehicle right away because we're going to go through the drive shafts and how to reinstall all of this stuff on the car in a separate video. So if you like these videos, like, subscribe, share, and maybe leave a comment down below so we can know we can do better. So we can know we can do better. And we'll see you the next time on the Camp Chaos Chronicles.